Well, when we think about mushrooms, what probably comes to mind are those dome shaped fungi growing out of the ground. But there is a species with a more unusual lifestyle. They are called zombie fungus because they grow in the carcasses of insects. More specifically, it eats the insect's brain and then sprouts out of their heads. Tora Couture is our science columnist. She also teaches biosciences at the University of Alberta. She's here with all the gory details. Hi, Tora.
Hi, Jessica.
What are these mushrooms and why are they so terrifying?
Well, you know what? I would argue they're not that terrifying, mostly because they don't eat the brains of humans. They're
Okay.
just in the insect world. So we can sort of sit back and watch nature take its course without worrying about ourselves. So that's nice. But these are the cordyceps. And there's actually like 600 different species of this type of mushroom
Hmm.
found in nature. Not um, all of them live off of insects, and particularly like eating brains. Only a couple of them, and they're not generally considered cordyceps, they're sort of subspecies now, actually infect live insects, or they're the real zombie mushrooms that take over the brains of the ants and control their behavior until the mushroom sprouts out of the insect's head. That's very cool. But most of the cordyceps don't do that. They colonize a already dead insect. And they use the nutrients. I mean, that's what mushrooms do, right? They're the nature's recyclers. They're the cleanup crew.
Hmm.
They feed off of all the dead matter, the decaying matter, grow into a fruiting body, and then spread those nutrients throughout the ecosystem again. So they're cool. I mean, they're mostly in humid jungles as well, so we don't see them here in Alberta. But I don't know, they can be kind of beautiful too.
Why are these somewhat gruesome mushrooms important? I feel like this is coming off of a Halloween theme, but this is strictly nature.
This is strictly nature. This is all, it's funny because this a study about cordyceps was published yesterday, and it has no tie-in necessarily to Halloween, and yet here we are a week early. Um, so the cordyceps have been mostly, they get a name for their gruesome kind of natural action, but also because they have been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries.
Hmm.
Most of the purported uses have not shown to have true clinical evidence for, but there is some, and they've been investigated, there's some potential to be an antiviral or an anti-cancer drug. So that's really interesting. There's a chemical in the mushrooms that have been isolated called cordycepin, and it's found in pretty high doses in a couple of the species, and it's shown to be, at least in the lab, toxic to leukemia cell lines. And so it does seem to have some worthwhile reason to investigate it further for its anti-cancer properties.
How does cordycepin and that specific chemical address or treat cancer?
So the molecule, if you look at cordycepin, it looks a lot like what we call in molecular biology or in biochemistry a nucleoside analog. What all that means is that it looks a lot like a chemical you'd add to DNA. And so in groups of cells or viruses or cells that are dividing too quickly, we get a viral infection because the virus replicates faster than our immune system can keep up.
Hmm.
We get cancer because our cells start to replicate faster than our immune system can keep up. And so if you add this nucleoside analog, which I might point out we have a class of chemotherapy drugs that fit into this particular umbrella term, it gets added to the cells that are, or the particles that are actively replicating their DNA and makes the DNA not tenable, just not, it damages the DNA. And so
Hmm.
it does have a lot of sort of other reasons or sort of reasons that we think that it could certainly be used as a chemotherapy drug because it seems to function very similar to other stuff that we're already in use. The problem with researching it has been getting enough cordycepin actually synthesized in nature to try and experiment with it in a controlled way and have it widespread so that other labs and people can ask experimental questions based on it so we can see if it does stand up to the scientific rigor that hasn't really faced yet.
Can you extract more of that chemical from mushrooms?
It turns out yes, partly because of how they're cultivated. So that was this new study. It was published yesterday in Frontiers in Microbiology. And these researchers from South Korea were able to figure out how to grow more potent cordyceps mushrooms Previous attempts at culturing these mushrooms involved growing them on brown rice. And Mi Kyung Lee from Chungbuk National University went, wait a second. Why are we growing them on brown rice? They don't like rice. They like insects.
They're like
right?
me, not a fan of rice. Got it.
Right? Exactly. So they're like, okay, what she tried was growing them on their favorite food and seeing what happened. And she was right.
So we found that we can use all kind of edible insects. And after we found that all insect is good for this mushroom growth. And additionally, the bioactive compound is increased dramatically.
They used 7 different insect species, again, all edible, because they reasoned that if this does kind of upscale to some sort of human application, having it already safe for human consumption is a great start. And now they also found that they grew absolutely much, much, much better, much more potent when they were grown on the insects.
We're talking about bugs. Was there a specific insect that helped this insect-eating mushroom grow better?
There was, actually.
Okay.
So they tried crickets, silkworm pupae, mealworms, grasshoppers, a couple others, Japanese rhinoceros beetle. And it was the Japanese rhinoceros beetle that grew not only the best mushrooms, but also the most potent, 34 times more potent in cordycepin.
Wow.
Compared to the mushroom grown on silkworm pupae. 100 times more potent than if it was grown on brown rice. So this is what we think is the active chemical, and now it's the Japanese rhinoceros beetle that seems to produce the most. So what's fascinating here is that the researchers went and analyzed, as researchers do, they kept asking more questions and went, well, what is it about the Japanese rhinoceros beetle? And it turns out that it's the fattiest of all the various substrates. And it also has the highest proportion of a fat called oleic acid. So they think they've sort of figured out the natural favorite recipe for the cordyceps mushrooms.
How can this research be used in a practical capacity?
Right. So the plan is okay, number one, cordyceps mushrooms are generally very expensive and consumed in traditional Chinese medicine. So finding a place to make more of them makes economic sense. But growing them on, just a whole bunch of Japanese rhinoceros beetles it poses some logistical challenges, as you could imagine. So actually they're looking at trying to grow these mushrooms not only to supply the traditional Chinese medicine market, but also to ramp up the research into cordycepin. And now that they have this recipe, they think this perfect, concoction of sugars and proteins and fats, they're hoping to find other more just feasible substrates, like old compost, maybe different compost streams or waste streams, to allow these mushrooms to do what they do best, which is recycle, right? Which is decompose. And so they're looking at maybe closing the loop a little bit and using these mushrooms to not only produce something that is, valuable, but off of something that can actually require a lot more degradation than we've been giving it.
Pretty interesting. Thanks so much, Tora.
You're welcome.
Tora Couture is radioactive science columnist. She also teaches biosciences at the U of A. You can follow her throughout the week on Twitter. She is at Dr. Tora Couture.